So I want to talk in this video about how I figured out what the urban fantasy genre looks like. So that was my question. What is the state of the urban fantasy genre today? And then what are the different subgenres that exist so that I can figure out how to slot my book into them and make the marketing ultimately easier. So this was the process that I followed in order to do that. So the first question I had to ask myself is, what is genre really? You know, is it character? Is it story? Is it setting? These are all things that I was thinking about as I was going through this process. And so I came up with two theories. The first theory was that urban fantasy readers want clear subgenre signals. So even the smallest things on a cover can make the biggest difference. That was something that jumped out at me in my conversation with a few authors at the 20 Books Vegas conference, is that small things make a big difference. They send different signals. And so how can I tune into that a little bit better to make my covers a little bit more targeted so that they'll convert better? And then the second theory was that I don't think I'm doing my job until I'm at least three subgenres deep. If I look at the books that I read, the traditional books that I read in urban fantasy for this project in the beginning, and then the indie books, what I could do is I could clearly trace a line from the top of the genre all the way down to the bottom of where I thought that the subgenres of those books were. And so my thought was, I'm probably not doing my job until I'm at least three subgenres deep. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to articulate to readers through the cover, through the book description, through the first 10% of the book, what subgenre my book is. And I'm going to have to do that pretty quickly and pretty well. So I had to ask myself four important questions. The first was, do readers cross over? So do readers of certain subgenres or sub-subgenres cross over to others? And if yes, what subgenres enjoy crossover and which ones do not? I think that's not something I can immediately answer today, but it's important because then as I say I write this series and then I write another series, do I need to stay within the same subgenre, or will I have a little bit of latitude to branch out a little bit? That I don't know, but I think that's something I have to get better at as I go, but it's worth asking the question now so that it's top of mind. The next question is, what urban fantasy categories exist? So if I look at Amazon and if I look at all the other retailers, what categories and tools are retailers giving me to classify my book as urban fantasy? So if I look at the categories that are out there currently, which ones are the most and least competitive? So I can help position myself. Third, I wanted to ask, who are the top 10 indie urban fantasy writers? Who are they? How did they become successful? That's just easily accomplished by looking at the Amazon author ranking and then figuring out who the urban fantasy authors are, and that's a quick exercise. And then lastly, which I think is the most important question, because I think ultimately this is what will guide me in the rest of my journey, is how can I visualize the genre? Is there a logical way of visualizing the different subgenres of urban fantasy so that I can understand the history of the genre, the current state of the market, and potentially where it's going? So to the question of, is there a logical way of visualizing urban fantasy subgenres, I treated the genre like a rabbit hole. And I asked, how many levels deep can I go before I start splitting hairs? So how far can you go down the rabbit hole of the urban fantasy genre before genre is no longer genre? It's like splitting an atom, right? So just looking at all the books that I've read, I came up with four levels, and starting from top to bottom, the male or female protagonist I think is important. It doesn't ultimately determine the genre, but I do think it is an important descriptor, and I think it's where you need to start. And then the second level to me is it real or fantasy? So I would wager that 90 to 95% of most of the urban fantasy that people are calling urban fantasy, when they mean that in the true sense of the term, is stories that take place in the real world, either in the current day or in a near future. So Dresden takes place in Chicago. Moonheart takes place in, I think, Canada. I mean, it's all kinds of other places all over the world where it can take place, but it has to be the real world. If it's fantasy, I think that's a perfectly valid subgenre, but it's a different subgenre. So that would be something that you could call, say, high urban fantasy, where it's an urban setting, but it's all imaginative. And then the third descriptor, I think, which would be important, which would be the subgenre, would be the actual subgenre. So would that be crime? Would that be adventure? Would that be, you know, romance? Whatever that looks like. And then fourth, I think the last descriptor you can get to before you start splitting hairs, in my opinion, is the type of supernatural hero. So urban fantasy is kind of unique to me in that it's depending on who the main character is, that really drives the ultimate genre in the audience. So if your character is a werewolf, that's a totally different conversation than if your character is a vampire. And so werewolf readers like werewolf books, vampire readers like vampire books. I do believe that there's crossover, but I do think that the type of supernatural hero is the importance of that in marketing your branding and your genre, I think cannot be understated. All right, so if we look at the Dresden Files, just so you know, I'm not making this up. So level 1 for me would be a male hero. Level 2 for me is that it takes place in the real world, which is Chicago. Level 3, which is the actual subgenre, it would to me be crime or noir. And then finally, the class of character is that Harry Dresden is a wizard. And so, to me, if I were going to look at other books that I could compare the Dresden Files to, I would look for other books that have a male hero that take place in the real world, that are in the crime or noir genre, and that have a wizard as a main character. To me, that would be a very logical way of saying, okay, if you like my book, or if you like Dresden, then you'll like this. So if I happen to have a story with a wizard that's a main character, I'm going to start at the bottom and then I'm going to build my way up, just to make sure that all the boxes are met. To use another example from another best-selling urban fantasy series, the Anita Blake series, here's where you have a female hero, you have a story that takes place in the real world, which is in St. Louis, and then you also have a crime/noir subgenre or feel to it, and then you have a character that's a necromancer. So to me, that's a very logical way of approaching both of those. So how Dresden and how Anita Blake are different are that Dresden is a male hero, Anita is a female hero. They both share a commonality in that they take place in the real world in major cities in the United States. They both share the crime noir subgenre, although they both have slightly different tones to them, right? Anita Blake is a different color. The tone of Anita Blake is a different color than the tone of Dresden. And then ultimately, though, the reason that they're different is that Dresden is a wizard and Anita Blake is a necromancer or a vampire hunter. So why is this important? Why do I care? Because the benefit for me is if I created a map of genres based on this tiering, then I could see how concentrated each subgenre is and where the gaps are. So this was something I built out at the very beginning of the process, and it's something that's getting better and better the more books I read. But just this, as I show you this early example, just so you can see what my thought process was. So this is another mind map that I created in Scapple, and now the genre that you're writing in may be different. So I recognize that not everyone watching this is going to be doing urban fantasy. Your genre is going to look different. Your mileage on this is going to vary. What I want you to think about is how can you drill down in the genre that you're writing in to get to that atom, right? Because it's going to look different. Maybe there are 5 or 6 different subgenres for your book, or maybe there's only 2. But if you think about this and you can start classifying the books that you're reading in the genre, I think this makes a world of difference. And I personally just feel so much more confident about how I'm going to market with whatever book I write, because I feel like I get it now. So for example, you can see I've got urban fantasy at the top, and then you've got male or female protagonists. Personally, I don't think that it's worth saying, okay, I have female crime noir and then I have female adventure. I don't think that's the case. I just think it's important to draw that lineation, because readers, some readers do prefer female protagonists and some prefer male. I think that people cross over, but it's still a good thing to classify. And then real world and fantasy world. So as you can see, the majority of the titles that I've read so far, and this is really just, kind of picking titles randomly, they take place in the real world. And then I've got one, which is by Jasmine Walt, which is the Bane Chronicles, which takes place in a fantasy world. So that's what I would call high urban fantasy. Totally different subgenre, totally different expectations, but it is a valid subgenre nonetheless. And as you can see, out of all the things that I've read so far, you can see a huge concentration in the crime noir subgenre. So, you've got necromancers, you've got wizards, you've got magic wielding humans, you've got humans that don't wield magic. Like, they're all slightly different and they all bring their own unique color and flavor to that subgenre. But I think classifying them by the class of supernatural character, I think is very helpful for me when I was building this out. So this is a map that's going to get bigger and better over time. Imagine every book I read, 2 to 3 books a week, this is going to get bigger, and I'm really going to start to be able to see where the concentrations are, where the gaps are, and then let's say, for example, maybe there are no crime noir books with shifters in them. I'm just being silly, but maybe that's the case. Maybe there aren't enough of those. And so maybe that's a place where I could slide in, right? And so if I understand that, then it just makes sense that I could write something that's already dialed into the sweet spot of what readers are asking for, but they're not necessarily getting in the marketplace. Make sense? So that's really it. It's just a simple process of visualizing what the genre looks like, because I think it's so easy to look on Amazon and see how books are doing and think you know how they're doing, but it makes so much more sense and it's so much easier to simply just visualize everything. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of visualizing data.